Once I asked why men were so flat-chested and women had all these exciting protrusions. And the response was, long time ago, there lived a woman with the world's biggest breast that stretched for miles and miles. And each time she moved, the breast would sing. Hong Korea, black, black, mu, de, mu, na, pakiko, de, mu, na, pakiko, wuyo, tra. So she got to an unknown town, and there were a few men on their way to the farm, mistook the moving breast for something dangerous. So they attacked it and then cut it into pieces. Word got around, and the first responders were the women. So when they got to the scene, they picked up the big chunks and slapped them on their chest. And by the time the men got to the scene from the villages, it was left with the tiny little pieces, hence the explanation. This memory and song, thank you very much. This memory and song came to me after more than 4 decades when I was reading a book 3 weeks ago. A book by a writer who is able to transport the readers into the past, and it didn't matter how far back. She reminds us of the present, and she projects the future also accurately. We're gathered here this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to have a one-on-one session with this amazing God-sent writer. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for making the time. You'll be delighted you came. With your kind permission, I'll ask everyone to take out their phones and search for the meaning of a word for just a minute, after which I will request everyone to keep their phones mute. You don't want any distraction. Every second of this conversation counts. And whilst we are at it, I might as well point out the location of our restrooms. There's one straight ahead of me to the right, where you came in from. This building to my left, when you go up the stairs to the right, there's another restroom, and then straight ahead through the car park, there's another restroom. This is so that we reduce the time of the distraction. So the word we are searching for is zwingen, spelled Z or Z-W-I-N-G-I-N-G. I'll give you 30 seconds, 1 minute to see who will find it first. You might get an autographed book for free if you're the first to come up with the meaning of that word. Yes?
Moving back and forth from side to side while suspended on an axis.
Thank you. Jennifer, in her books, before I get to that point, though, I can identify with the word neigh, the sound of horses. As in, neigh, when the horses are making the sound. But what word would best describe a mosquito? So isn't zwinging a much better word than buzzing? And these are the things that, amazing things about the writer that we have today. Her skills in creating words that best describe situations and events. I think these words have to go mainstream. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome our usual participants and then also those who are joining us for the first time to NYU Accra Gardens and to the 8th edition of NYU Labone Dialogues. The guys will say, Labone Sanigba. This amazing initiative was started by our site director, Frankie, to drive home the idea of a private university serving the public. All the names and sequences of events on the program you all haven't changed, but for the sake of our online audience, whom we are extremely delighted to have joining us from all over the world. My name is Yaya Alpha Suberu, your host for this afternoon. I'm involved with NYU and NYU Accra in different ways. On stage to my left is Lena, Kina Likimani. Kina describes herself as a voracious reader, and she would love to be paid to do nothing but to read and read and read. On stage to the right is our distinguished guest, Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. When you read her books, you would understand why she teaches creative writing in the top universities in the world. And each word that you read in her book is like laying a brick on a solid foundation. And she's building us up from sentence to sentence, to page by page, and to book after book. Ladies and gentlemen, Makumbi Jennifer.
Hello. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. I've spent the last 1 hour with Jennifer. I'm still speechless. I mean, every time I have to talk about Jennifer and her books, I hope that I'm coherent, at least to get out a question. That's my mother. And I'm not the only one. So we are in literary circles, so I can say my mother is Amatedu and she's right there. And she told me when I said, oh, we are going to do this event with Jennifer. She hardly comes out in public, so Jennifer will bring her out. That's one. And two, she said, I should write down my questions. Or do I have to speak? I don't want to sound like a mumbling idiot because, it's Jennifer. And when she met her, she said, I'm in awe. So while I always want people, when I moderate events, to make up their own minds, I'm here to tell you that I am sharing the stage with currently the person that happens to be, I think, my favorite African, my mother is there, so she knows, my favorite African writer at the moment. And I hope that by the end of this evening, you would have understood why. In any event, there are books on I suppose that's your left. You mustn't leave here without one of her books, because you've come to a book event and writers have to eat. So welcome. My name is Kina. Jennifer.
Hello, Kina.
Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm still awed, first of all, by the drums. I just sat here and said, oh, my God. But mostly by Amataidu. At this moment, God, you have no idea how long I've waited to meet you and to see you and to talk to you, but also to thank you for the work you did for us African women writers. I know you did a lot for the whole of Africa and the whole of African readers, but for African women readers, it's just incredible for me to sit on the pile of your books and cross my legs and say, okay, so what can I write about now? Because you did most of the work, so I don't have to work very hard. And I can think of other things to think about because you took all the attacks that were waiting for women writers. You were called all sorts of names, or the reviewers were terrible to you. Now they think we are great. But you took it all for us, and I want to thank you on behalf of all other African women writers.
I can ask my question. You have something.
Go on.
I'm going to piggyback on our host, his question on English, on the language.
Yes.
And first I'm going to say that, your publishers, there is always well, first let me say that it was hard for Jennifer to get published in the West, which, by the way, is a good thing. We'll get to that, because Chintu had no white characters, so they couldn't see themselves in it, so they couldn't relate. But after she, after a lot of us here on the continent had done the needful, the Guardian, when they reviewed Chintu, said, Jennifer, and I'm not saying the Guardian because it's the Guardian, because I want to feed off the comments. They said, Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi does for Ugandan literature what Chinua Achebe did for Nigerian writing. Okay. So it's like, you know, Achebe, Nigeria, you, Uganda. But the reason I think that so I'm not going to engage with that, but we're going to feed off that. I think that when, of your generation of writers, you are going to probably be the one most likely to be compared to be said you are an echo of the previous generation.
Yes.
Using you,
Achebe,
Achebe, as the previous generation. And I think a lot, if people are being honest, has to do with language, English.
Yes.
Achebe said we were going to do unheard of things to the English language.
Yes.
And I think when I read The First Woman, you know, Chintu is such an epic that you can't even zero in. I couldn't even engage with how you're writing the English because you were doing so much in Chintu that was amazing.
Yeah.
Not that The First Woman is not amazing, but in The First Woman, because it's less of an epic scale,
Yeah.
the way you did the language, you wrote the work as though ordinary Ugandans, you reflected how they speak, how they have morphed the English language, how the, you know, in one of the short stories, you say the parents are talking Ugandally. So talk a little bit about how you managed to do that so that we do not find it difficult to access the story that you are trying to tell. Because in a sense, the novel is not of our making.
Yes.
We came to it. So we have to use it as a medium. So talk a bit about the language.
Okay, thank you. So, as most of you know, those of you who've been reading my books, I don't write proper English as far as the received language or the Queen's English is concerned. But I am well trained, trust me, and I used to teach English in Uganda, English language from O-level to A-level. And however, when I went to study creative writing, I did this in Britain. And I started to write, especially dialogue, in perfect English. And the speech will fall flat on the page because my people don't speak like that. So what people don't realize is that when you're an African and you're writing in English, you're hearing the people speak in your language, where always everything comes to you in your first language because the story is happening in Uganda. The action is over there. The people are Ugandan, and they're speaking Luganda. And so when you write, somewhere between your mind and the hands, you turn everything into English. And often you put it on the page in English and it just doesn't work. And English especially can throw tantrums on the page. It just is so demanding sometimes. And often you think, okay, what am I losing? What am I gaining? Because that's the thing about language. Sometimes English can be really useful and it can give you different ways of expressing yourself, but often it's very limiting. And so it was taking away that texture of my story. It was taking away the place that is being told. But it was also taking away me, the author, because you don't want your Ugandan book to sound so British that the British reading it, imagine you're writing it in London. Oh, okay, I was writing in Manchester, but hey. So it was important for me, one, to show that these are Ugandan, and two, that Ugandans don't speak English the way the British speak it. Yes, they brought it to Uganda a long time ago, and yes, we've adopted it. but we don't speak it the way they do. We've created our own English. So, and most of you are aware that there are so many Englishes around Africa. You know, we have English, the Zimbabweans have Zinglish, Kenya has Sheng, Nigeria has Niger. I don't know what you have. Is it Ginglish?
I don't know.
There are all these kinds of Englishes, and for me, this is me taking it back to the empire and saying, thank you very much for English. This is the way this is what we've done with it. And it's wonderful. You're welcome to understanding it. You know, so that I don't have to speak to the British first in proper English. I'm speaking to Ugandan first, and the British and everybody else can join us if they want to. But it also allowed me, therefore, to stop this flow of writing from Africa to the center of the empire in Britain, because that's where we are published. So for a long time, our early writers, they were writing straight to the empire, one, because they were fighting the empire, but also because they were being published there and edited there and agented there. So everybody over there demanded that you write in a particular way. But for us, we've traveled, and we are there with them, and we're saying, hell no, you're not going to do that with my book. Because I'm centering the Ugandan reader. I'm centering the African reader. So it's still very difficult to wrench that away from them, to say, you know, I'm focusing on Ugandan readers first, because after all, when you write, you center the British or the American, and my goodness, all of you Ghanaian will agree with me that we've loved American books. We've enjoyed British books, even though they didn't write to us, even though they didn't care whether Africans understood them, okay? But we have. It's time that the British too and the Americans start to enjoy African writing from an outsider's point too. So they are listening into what we are saying to each other. So those are some of the few things the language was doing for me.
In a lot of your interviews, and even here, you make a point of saying you were writing for the African reader.
Yeah.
So you have, in both Chintu and The First Woman, or A Girl is a Body of Water, it's stories within stories.
Yes.
You are at pains to tell us our history, our mythology. How do you, is that first of all, is that something you intended to do, one? And two, how do you balance that with getting a riveting story written with all the missions that you set out for yourself?
Okay, so I was lucky as a student when I was doing my first degree in Uganda that we studied oral African traditions. So as a child, I had access to my grandparents. So I lived in the city, but during holidays, my grandfather would insist, send her to the village. She will be spoiled by the city. She won't understand her culture. She won't know this, she won't know that. There was always that anxiety with my father's generation, who were the first people to immigrate to the cities. So I used to go to the village, and there was a lot of storytelling. My father was obsessed with books. You know, he just wanted me to speak English properly, to learn everything. I don't know, it happened with our generation. So I learned all the stories, the folk tales, the myth from my grandparents. And I told them as a child, and I understood them at that level. But when I grew up and I was doing my first degree, when we were introduced to African literature, we were taught a module on African oral traditions. And we were told that this is the beginning of African literature, that you start with the oral African traditions, because that's what our ancestors left behind. That's the creativity they left behind. Now, I had grown up with Shakespeare and Dante and all of those Western writers, but my roots, my literary roots, are not in those books. My literary books are in the myth of Chintu and Nambi. That's what my ancestors left behind for me. So when I started writing, I realized, because of the course we did, because at the when we were doing this course, we were told that all these texts are coded, that what we were telling as children as stories, they are not what we think they are. These are texts that are coded, they have other meanings, and you have to decode them. And we started to decode them in that text. And I realized that many of these stories were told by women who were talking about their situations as a second wife, as a first wife, you know, but they wouldn't tell them directly because they were often critical of the husband and of the patriarchy. So they were coded, and you have to decode them. So it's until I studied feminism that I took a feminist reading to some of those stories, and I was gobsmacked. I just could not believe what these old texts were doing. So once I realized that these texts were as good as novels that come from the West, I thought, okay, I'm taking them with me into my novels or into my literature. Not necessarily to preserve them, because I don't need to preserve them. They've been there before me, and I think they will exist after me. But because I wanted them to anchor my writing in Africa, in my history. Just like when you read a lot of books from the West, you'll find a quote of Shakespeare somewhere. Those writers are anchoring their writing into that work that is specifically, traditionally theirs. So for me, it was very important to take this writing, but it was also helping me. So it just doesn't, I don't bring a story and drop it, you know, into the novel. It's working, it's doing something, and often it's helping me to tell the story I'm telling. Yeah.
I want to stay there for because of course you write as you write us as we are, and all the contradictions.
Yeah.
I think in Ghana, your contemporary would be, is Martin here? Martin is not here. Yeah. In Ghana, your contemporary, in terms of what I'm going to say,
Yeah.
is Martin Egbewuble. So Martin also does this thing where he blends very well, and it looks like an odd thing, but that's how we live, right?
Yes.
People go to church, and then they may have some odd superstitious beliefs rooted in our culture,
Yes.
right? And it's how we are.
Yes.
There's no contradiction in
No.
it.
No.
So Martin has a story where somebody is has bought he's set up a data bank of computers, and he's running algorithms to break the lottery. And somebody else wants to find out how it is that this man is always winning. So this investigator goes to a juju guy, and he says, okay, I must tell the story every time I say. He says, okay, I can make you enter his room, like, you know, you go through the walls. He didn't actually say that. He said, go and bring me a white bull or ram or something. Everything must be white. But, you know, that's hard to get. So this guy goes and gets a bull or a ram. Everywhere is white except his balls. So when the guy enters into the room, he's okay. He enters fully. Is investigating, says, oh, this is what this guy is up to. And then he hears a commotion and he has to run out. Of course, it's apparently you need all the whole whiteness to go back and forth. But so when he goes through the wall again, he leaves hanging on the walls a pulsating set of balls. And this makes complete sense to me, doesn't it? Computers and so, but the reason I'm bringing this up is what happens in a generation of a people who are losing their stories. Because here in Ghana, at least among the southern Christian lot, everything we have completely forgotten or have chosen to forget all of our stories and have rooted everything in someone else's creation story.
Yes.
Is that happening in Uganda? And because me, when I see what you're doing in the first one, I'm like, oh, Jennifer wants to remind us that these things exist. You said you are not there to preserve, but I think that because we are at risk of losing them, it feels like preservation.
The problem with preserving oral traditional stories in written form is that they become frozen. Now, oral traditions are a living thing, okay? They were something else before I came along, and there will be something else after I've gone. Now, if you see Western oral traditions, you see them in Brothers Grimm.
Mm-hmm.
So all those stories we read about Cinderella, Rapunzel, the Three Bears, whatever, those were their oral stories. And then these two brothers came along and wrote them down. And that's it. They can't change. So the orality stopped there. So for me, having studied oral traditions and knowing that every story that you know has been something else. So these stories arrive at a time, and aspects of them have become redundant. The performers throw that away. Aspects have arrived from a new culture. They add that, and then the story carries on. And then every performer of any traditional story adds something and takes away something. So for me to get those stories that I got free of charge, that I have no author, and I calcify them and write them down and make them, oh, this is the cement, this is it, is to kill them in a particular way. And because I was aware of that, I always write these stories interpretively. This allows someone else to take it and do something else with it. So for so many stories that I told, and I thought, for goodness sake, Ugandans are as Christians as Ghanaians. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, the performance of Christianity is so out of this world in Uganda. And so when I wrote Chintu, because Chintu is the first man on earth in Uganda, I thought, oh, what are they going to think? But I immediately, every Ugandan, even those born in Britain, like, oh, what are you doing with our Chintu? Mm-hmm. I say, what do you know? You say, who doesn't know? I don't know what is going on, but every story I've thrown at Ugandans, like, oh yeah, we know that. We all know that. And I think, you know, I had to travel to my grandfather to learn those stories, and I'm an older generation. But young people are still saying, yeah, we know them. Mm-hmm. So there's something going on. I don't know whether Christianity is strong enough to erase tradition, because Christianity has been here more than 100 years. Rather than changing us, Africans have changed it. You know, because you know very well that the way we pray in church is not necessarily what the missionaries told us. There were no drums, there was no dancing, there were no spirits possessing us. It's so African, you know. So the African ways of doing has taken over Christianity, and I'm not really worried that much.
Okay. Please clap. Thank you, thank you. For those, we have to talk about Chintu, obviously. It's like the elephant in the room. We are skirting it. So, for those of you who haven't read Chintu, please read it. But what did you set out to do in Chintu? I'm asking you the big question. And why did it take so long?
Kina loves Chintu. This is a book I wrote in 2012, and I haven't read ever since. So what was I trying to do? Yeah. Often when I set out to write a book, by the time I finish it, my intentions have changed. But one of the things that I wanted to do, and you won't believe this, was, remember Chintu is not my first book. The First Woman is my first. So I had already written The First Woman, which is a feminist novel. And I knew it was a very hot feminist novel. Had it been published then in 2003, it would have been a little bit too much. But now when it came out, feminism had, in Africa, had saturated a lot. But at the time, one of the things that I wanted to do was to show how the patriarchy oppresses masculinities as well. And I thought that if I show men that the patriarchy is not your friend, then it would be easy to convince them to join me in fighting for feminism. Because so one of the things that I know in my culture is that right from childhood, boys are told don't go to the kitchen. Boys don't belong in the kitchen. You shouldn't be seen with burns. But of course, what that means is that our sons grow up not knowing how to cook. And so when they fall in love, the wives don't come with a certificate of cooking. It's until she arrives and you eat bad food and you realize, of course, some of women would think, yeah, they deserve it. But there are a lot of men in Uganda, because they are not allowed to cook, have been eating bad food for a long time, and they would like to go to the kitchen and do something for themselves. But culture says no. The other thing is, and I tackle this in The First Woman, is the dating industry. I don't know about you Ghanaians, but in Uganda, girls milk boys. It's until you have a son, you realize, you think, hang on a minute, you're not going to do that to my son. But when it's your daughters, it's okay. The girl, because the man, when the girl marries, she goes into the man's family. The girl expects the boy, who is their age, who is as broke as they are, to look after them from the moment they start dating. And that does not necessarily mean she's going to marry him. She's just seeing whether he's worth it, and if it doesn't work out, she walks off after he's invested all his money in her. And I remember one time, my kid brother, who was 16, was dating a girl. And he would come to me and say, Jennifer, please, 200 shillings. Lend me 200 shillings. 50 for transport for me and her. Then 100, I'm going to treat her to something. We are going to eat something. And then the rest is whatever. And then he would come home late, and you say, what? I walked. She ordered expensive things. And I started to think, this is ridiculous. That doesn't mean I wasn't taking money off guys who were dating me. But, it was wrong for my brother. It was wrong what this girl was doing to my brother, But, and then after that, when they start to decide to marry, he's going to bill everything, the wedding, the whatever. And after that, after they're married, if my mother falls sick, that you go to your husband, mom is sick. But he has a mother and a dad, but he looks after mine as well. So I thought, yes, men are treated like lords or whatever, but they pay a heavy price. And I thought that if I write into, and I say, men, look what we're doing to you, feminism is good for you. So I thought that I could write the book in that way to prepare for my second book. So that was one of the things that I wanted to do that I felt that feminism hadn't done. Those gray areas where patriarchy, of course I went into the homosexuality as well, where the patriarchy is not very kind to men. But of course there was the history before Europe arrived. That was the major thing. So when you study a bit, you find out that people like Hegel, this is a philosopher who said that Africa didn't have history until Europe arrived. You know, and in Europe, they believed this, that history started with them arriving. So, but there was also another problem, that whenever Africans wrote a novel and had Europe talking about colonization, I found that in British universities, they focused mostly on the European, whatever they did in Africa. So things fall apart. When you read this book, Europe doesn't arrive probably until 50 pages or much later. But when you look at the way it's taught in British universities, it's all about, oh my God, we are terrible. Oh, we are such bad people. Look what we did. Such a beautiful culture, and we destroyed it. And you're like, get over yourselves, you know, because there was so much more going on in that novel. I don't know about you, but in Uganda, we looked at Okonkwo, the man, the husband, the son, and all that fear and what it did to him. Yes, we were colonized, but that's not the major issue that Things Fall Apart say to us in Africa. But in Europe, that's what it was all about. So after seeing all of that, I decided, you know what? You're not having colonization in my book, because I would like you to look at my culture and my people in all their ugliness and in all their beauty. I want you to deal with everything. Because in Europe, they don't deal with Ikemefuna or his death. They just pretend it didn't happen, you know? I want you to deal with it. You know, if you want to read Africa, you're not going to look at just the beautiful Africa. There's an ugliness to us as well. So I went into Africa before Europe and brought out that history. It was oral. I could find it in Ugandan songs, in sayings, in names of places and rivers, in so many things. And I wrote that, and then I skipped colonization, and I went into the future. But of course, Europe is Europe. I was invited to Oxford University to talk about it. And one clever guy said, the more you did not write about colonization, the more we saw it there. You can't win. But that's what I was doing.
Thank you. So, no, hold on. I want to ask a question, but I have to make sure that I'm not,
That's the oldest.
yeah, okay. That's the original. The curse.
That was published in Kenya.
Yes, this was how we first readers encountered Chintu, as it won a Kwani Manuscript Prize, and before you guys got the new covers, this was the original. So the curse, there's a curse. I'm not giving anything away because I think it's at the back of the books. Is the curse in Chintu part of the oral tradition?
The curse is one of those aspects of culture that I think you'll find anywhere in the world. So we have a lot of curses in Africa, rather in Uganda. And mental health especially has always been explained by a curse or something like that. But of course, going back to the Bible, you find the curse there. And it travels through all cultures, you know. So it was something that was really easy for me to grab and use.
Okay. I'm going to, this is supposed to be a master class, so every now and then I have to ask about craft. How do you manage to do, you know, her books have amazing pacing. You know, as a reader, I can't describe when you see bad pacing, I don't think you recognize it as bad pacing. You just think there's something wrong with this book. But when you see good pacing, excellent pacing, you're like, wow, pacing. So how do you manage your pacing? Because in Chintu, there's magnificent pacing. In the first woman, even in the dialogue. So is that natural, or you tell the people who are writing?
Pacing is one of the hardest things to do in the book. And only fellow authors would understand how hard it is. Because you as a reader, you just sail past it. You know, you say, this book is slow. Or, oh my God, it's so. That is all down to pacing. But I was lucky that I taught literature for a very long time before I started writing. And I taught English as well. And so I was teaching the things in literature and saying, okay, you know how we teach literature in Africa, you know. Okay, and the themes, you mentioned the themes, and the characters. So I was doing all of the things before, and I was aware that if you want the pace to slow down, you write long sentences. Oh. Yeah, I'm giving it away. I'm paid a lot of money to say the things. But if you want the pace to pick up, short sentences. So listen to yourself when you're angry or when you're excited. You can't sustain a long sentence because of the way you breathe, okay? So that is the way it works. Why? No, I swear. You know, that sort of things. So whenever I feel, especially in heightened emotion, it's slow. It's bang, 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 bang. And then when I feel that I need to slow it down, because the reader is, much as you think you're lying in your bed and you're reading, or it takes you through the paces. So I need to slow down the reader sometimes, and I need to raise it. Especially when we are coming to those, when somebody's going to die. Yeah, yeah, or some, yeah, I know when I'm going to kill somebody. You know, writers are like gods. Or when something terrible is coming, or somebody is going to be found out who's been lying, then I quicken the pace. Because I want to take the reader with me, but I don't want to keep them because they will lose interest. And then I take them up there. But it's very hard for a reader to be in heightened, just like you can't stay up here for a very long time. You need to bring them down. And often, humor, whether grim humor, is useful. Because once somebody laughs, the tension goes away. And then you work at building the tension. And then you take them up. And then they come down. But nobody will teach you that in creative writing course, and I don't teach it. But that is something that I use to teach students of literature and say, this is what is the doing. And so one of the things that I was told as a student of literature is that take your tools of satire with you. That is irony, that is humor, that is sarcasm. So when you're dealing with something painful, because sometimes readers can't handle that kind of pain, it's me. So what you do is to use irony, either use irony, because the reader then stops and looks around. Mm-hmm. What? Mm-hmm. Or use humor, grim humor, probably, and sarcasm.
Mm-hmm. Staying with Kraft and Chintu, it's an epic. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an epic novel. And when we think about epic novels, I mean, some of my favorites are old epic novels, like, you know, my favorites, Dostoevsky, Alexander Dumas, where you are, if you take the Brothers Karamazov, mm-hmm. Crime and Punishment, right? You know you are reading a story, mm-hmm. and you are enjoying it. There are so many themes. Mm-hmm. As somebody who reviews books, so many themes. In Chintu, there are so many themes. It's not limitless. I mean, there's a lot. Everything is there, right? So all the themes are there. and some really big ones: mental health, sexualities,
Yes.
curse, some kind of incest.
Yes.
What is that thing where they lynch people? What is that?
Mob justice.
Mob justice. I mean, this is just a few. AIDS, HIV, AIDS. I mean, to someone wanting to, but then when we are reading it, these are just things that are happening to people, and we are enjoying the story. And if you are not somebody who is a reviewer or an editor, it wouldn't even like bother you. You wouldn't see.
Yeah.
How do you manage to do that and sustain that over many characters? It has 5 major sections or something, and history that spans like pre-colonial to contemporary times. How do you manage to do that and come out with a book that is a page turner? How do you, like, please tell them, even on a day-to-day basis, how you keep track of what is happening to whom?
Okay. One of the things that I do, I first of all cater for the reader who's not going to be bothered with the themes. That's the reader that I was when I was between 12 and 18. I was just reading, going to the end, what is going to happen, what is going to happen. I cater for that reader first, because for me, there must be a story. That's what holds my readers. I promise a reader a story. So I first plot out the story, and normally I say to people, I'm still putting down the bones, the skeleton. That is just the story. Normally by the time I start writing, the novel has been knocking about in my head for 4 or 5 years. So I know the characters, I know the places, the major characters. So I do that. It's until the story is strong and I know I'm not going to change it that I start to deal with the themes. But I don't impose themes on my books. The themes arise naturally from the story. And this is where it comes from, that as a writer, you must be a better reader. You must be a better reader than a writer, because you need to understand what your book is doing. There's something that I set out to do as an author, but there's something else that my book is doing. And often you read books and you realize the author didn't realize that this book was doing this. So the first thing I do is to pick up on what the book is doing itself. If I'm not interested in that theme, I mute it. I get rid of it. If I'm interested, I highlight it, okay? But of course, there are my intentions that I had, and I develop all of that. But because I did a PhD, I learned how to do research. So all my books are researched. Every time I come across something that my book is doing that I don't know much about, I go out and research it. I never do research first and then write a novel, because research will take you in all sorts of directions. You find out something fantastic and you think, oh my God, Ugandans would love to know this, and you put it in the book. And suddenly the book is full of research and you don't know what you're doing. But often when I think, okay, I'm going to do this, I do research it. And then I put myself in those places, at that time, in the shoes of the character, and I become that character, and then I write. The other thing that probably writers in here would like to know is that I write the senses. Smell, taste, see, hearing. So imagine yourself closing your eyes and you're sitting on a taxi from work to home. You will know where you are if you're not looking. That is because of the noises, the smells, the taste not so much. But I'm
The feeling of the distance.
Absolutely. So there are parts when you drive past a restaurant and you know which restaurant, you drive past a garbage pit, you know which one it is. You drive past the humps, you know exactly where you are. Unless you fall asleep, you won't be driven past your home. Not because you're saying, but because your other senses are alive. Now, what readers don't realize is that when you put them into a place and you tell them how it smells, you tell them what you see, you tell them what they say, the reader themselves become that character. They don't realize, but they become that character. And then everything becomes very vivid. And they say, oh my God, this author is fantastic. No, it's just the senses. I am helping you use your senses to realize that place. Often readers don't need much. It's like writing something scary. You don't need to do much. For most scary films, there's that door that creaks, and then the light that flickers, and then you're like, don't go there, don't go, please don't go there, because you've already worked yourself. The film has done nothing much, but you have gone into all places. And once as an author, you realize that readers are more creative than you are, and they are creating as you go along. You don't have to work hard. You just push a little bit there, a little bit there. So that's how I managed to do that.
She makes it like sound so easy. We'll take a reading. What time? What? 5 minutes for what? No. You mean before we get to Q&A?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow. Okay. Should we do a reading?
Yes.
You're doing a reading. Please. My mother is correcting me like I'm two.
Okay, so I'm going to read a part from the early, the first section of the book. This
First
is
woman.
of the. Oh, sorry, I imagined we were talking about just the first woman. So this is about Chilabo, a young girl growing up. She's 12 years old. It's 1975, and she's growing up in rural Uganda. And she's with her grandparents. And you know African grandparents. They can be very indulging. She's their eldest grandchild, their only one. And they treat her like as if she's special. But she's also well-loved around the village. But she has two problems. She doesn't know who her mother is, and sometimes she flies out of her body, or she thinks, she feels she flies out of her body, and she thinks probably she's a witch. And when she thinks about it, she decides, maybe I don't have a mother because I'm a witch. My mother found out I was a witch when she had me and dropped me and went away. So what does a girl like that do? You run to the witch, you know, in the village, and you ask her, well, can you help me find my mother? But like any 12-year-old, there's so much going on above her head in the adult world. So grandmother is enemies with the witch, and it's grandmother who's calling her a witch for particular reasons. So she imagines really she's a witch. And so she runs to her and says, can you find my mother? And I am a witch. I fly out of my body, and then I don't like the things they tell me to do as a girl, because I hate it. I don't understand why boys are treated differently and whatever. And the witch is like, oh, you're welcome. Of course I'll find your mother, and I can get rid of your problem. Unbeknown to her, she had fallen into something that was going on between her grandmother and the witch says to her, keep coming, I'll tell you. So the second time she goes back, she said, oh, I found your mother. And she loves you very much, but she can't see you right now. There are issues. But you need to keep coming to me, because one day when she's ready, I'll take you. And then she said, oh, the other thing you think about being a witch, I know. You are actually a very special girl. The first woman is in you, was born in you. And the girl is like, well, Oh, yeah. She was different. But the way we are now as women, the proper woman that we were was bred out of us. But she has been born in you, and I wish you can nurture her. And she says, no, but I want to get rid of her. And she says, maybe you should hear her story first, the story of the first woman. So you'll just have to keep on coming, and I'll tell you about this first woman. So the first time she comes back, she tells her the ABCD of a traditional indigenous feminism. And then she tells her that how women were, that first woman was bred out of her. So the part I'm going to read about is a conversation between this girl and that woman. So now they're talking about why the women are persecuted. So this is in Sota. Look, a woman worshipped here as a mother goes over there and fouls someone else's day, or she fouls nature. Have you not heard of grown men who will flee if a woman strips naked in public? Yes, Nsota. Oh my God, Nsota. Chirabo was on her knees, gesturing everywhere, because the foulness of her nakedness was the one thing that made her want to tear herself out of her body and bury it. It vexed, revolted, and sickened her. At home, she had to hide her knickers after washing them so boys would not see them, even though they could display their underwear in the open to dry them in broad daylight. She had never seen grandmother's knickers. In fact, the idea of them felt vulgar. Chirabo had to sit with her legs closed, even before the hearth, because her whatnot would put the fire out. So, do you know why I flashed the jackfruit tree? She asks. Nsota shook her head. Grandmother found me up the tree with the boys, and she said, you Chirabo, climbing trees like a boy? From now on, the fruit on this tree will go sour. Oh, she did not. And the boys turned on me. That Ntate spat and climbed down. The following day, when no one else could see, I said, let me go back and flash that tree right and lavish. Sota's silence was livid. The problem is down there. Chirabo snapped her legs open and then closed them. Nsota threw back her head and laughed. Oh, Chirabo, I love the way you don't bite your words. Down where? There. All the ugliness, all the rot, all the wickedness, and the witchery are packed there. When grandmother still bathed me, she would say, squat and wash your ruins. Will you lie? God in heaven, Chirabo whispered. People call it all sorts. They do. Sometimes I forget how humorous your grandmother can be. Ruins, oh. Jiwa says her mother calls it the burden. Did you wash your burden properly? Still laughing, Nsota picked up a pan with food and placed it on the fire. She asked Chirabo to take up the pan filled with dirty water and poured it outside. When Chirabo returned, she whispered into Nsota, did you hear about the woman on the radio? Which one? The young widow, the one whose husband died and whose father-in-law came to her house to throw her out? No. Where have you been, Nsota? She's the only topic anyone can talk about. Or tell me. So, her husband died suddenly. He was young and rich, the only one with wealth in the family. So he left her with several little ones who could not protect her. So after burial, she went home with her children. A week later, who arrives? Who? Father-in-law, with his clan. He says, Mukamwana, I have come for our children and our property. Pack your bags and go back where you came from. Mukamwana says, as you say, Tata, I will go and pack. She goes to the bedroom. Guess what she does? What? She comes out naked. You lie. Which naked? Stalkers, like a plucked chicken. She sits before the father-in-law, opens her legs wide like this. Chirabo opened her hands wide and places the whole of her foulness right there, like, whoa. Then she asks, Tata, before I go, where do I place this one? It was your son's favorite property. You lie, Chirabo. Father-in-law scrambles out of the chair screaming, "Wa la 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 la, help, I have been killed." Sprints out of the house like a youth. Mkamwana's killed me today. Last I heard, he had to do all sorts of rituals to cleanse himself. You know what grandfather said? Nsota shook her head. He said, if the old man had become a nwangwali that is empty of decency and had washed shame out of his eyes, let him go blind. Stop there.
So she of course, she keeps the property. Because, yeah, who's coming now? So, questions?
Yeah, well, since I have the mic, Jennifer, I would start with the first question.
Oh, by the way, you will keep your questions short. You know, Ghanaians are like, I have a question, and it's like 100-page comment. No.
Right. So the first one.
The first one?
Yes. when Chirabu was leaving town or for school, or well, leaving the village for school or for town for the first time, her dress that she wore, the dress was made in Ghana. And I was so fascinated when I saw that, and I was so excited. Jennifer coming to Ghana, something to do with Ghana. The second one is, I'm sorry. The second question is, in the beginning when the story was being told between Chirabu's grandmothers, and the baby was left in the anthill, there was a song that the baby kept singing, and that's how they got to know that she actually birthed twins, and one was left. It would be nice to hear you sing that song in the local language. I'll be fascinated. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw that made in Ghana. This was 1975.
Yeah, back then we used to get a lot of clothes in Uganda made in Ghana, and there was a certain level of quality attached to clothes made in Ghana. And then, of course, we had the embargoes on Uganda, and it all stopped. But recently, I went back to Uganda, and like everybody who goes home, you have to do clothes shopping. And I was told, try the clothes that come from Ghana. So people have started importing clothes from Ghana again. Yeah, and if you ever see a picture of me on the internet where one part of the dress is print, the other side is black.
Yes.
That was made in Ghana,
yeah.
and it's one of my favorite clothes. And
I know
indeed, I bought some clothes for my son, and one of them, the shirt didn't fit. But now I use it as a piece of art on the wall, the shirt. They are that good. Maybe the Ghanaians sell out their best clothes to abroad, because I see you don't believe me.
Oh, no, that's not
they
true. We
leave
know the
you
brand.
But they were really, really pretty good, and I can't wait to go shopping.
Good. Are you going to sing the song? Or?
The song When the Child Is. It's funny that he picked upon it being really a traditional song, because I was hoping people would think I made it up. But actually, it's a traditional song, and I know you're screaming, so Ugandans help me here. The song goes, I'm not a good singer. Batuzala babiri nga balongo waswa, kitaffe n'asuula ebbango waswa, azaala omuwala atazanga waswa, azaala omulenzi akozanga waswa, Oh, waswa ngolimba, waswa. Oh, waswa ngolimba, waswa. You know, these are songs I sang as a child.
Questions?
If you have questions, you can walk up to the mic and ask your question.
This gentleman here? No. Can you share? Can you share your mic?
So that
So they
people can
remain seated. Yeah.
Thank you, madam, and thanks for the very interesting conversation so far. I wrote down a lot because I'm trying, of course, also secretly to write a novel. My name is Peter Daniel. I work for the European Union. I apologize in advance because I leave a bit early because after we also have an event at the EU residence, also in literature. I hope to tag along Frankie Edozin, and everybody is, of course, also very welcome. My question, very short, and then the comment will be a bit longer. To what extent have you been influenced by other writers from Africa and maybe also Latin America? I'm asking because when you talked about orality, I was immediately thinking about a great writer from Colombia, the first Nobel Prize winner from there, Garcia Marquez, who famously said, well, I did not make everything up, and I got my inspiration when he was asked by my grandmother, who was with a very serious straight face talking about flying nuns and people who turn 220 and what have you. Just as a side note, I happened to marry later a Colombian, and then I met her family, and then I thought, well, it's not all made up, it actually happens then. And then the second part, also on a bit cross-African, inspiration and all that. Last year I also talked to people here. I was talking about a very good writer. He got the Prix Goncourt. He's from Senegal, and his name is Mohamed Sarr. And then, unfortunately, it's not been really very much translated. I see Mr. Diallo nodding. But he wrote, for instance, De Purs Hommes on LGBT in Senegal. So it's also my question a bit, to what extent is there cross-cultural, references? I'm asking, maybe a bit provocative, but when I heard everybody speak, we were quoting or mentioning Shakespeare and Dostoevsky and all that, but not so much other writers from either Africa or Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, Chintu has been compared to Garcia.
I can see that.
And I haven't read him.
No.
No, I haven't.
Jennifer, you mustn't say these things in public.
I have to. I have to. I'm going to read it, but I need it on, because often people think, how much did he influence you? Mm-hmm. And I must put it out that I have no idea. I had no idea he existed. It's the same with James Joyce. Mm-hmm. In Europe, Chintu is compared to James Joyce. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, no, I haven't read James Joyce.
Well, that's okay.
By the way, I'm very well read, but I haven't read James Joyce, and I haven't read Garcia, and I'm going to read him. But how much was I influenced by African authors? God, it's very hard to tell you how much I was influenced by African authors. But I keep on discovering how much other authors influenced me. So recently, as I was rereading God's Bits of Wood, which is Francophone,
Yes.
In the past, during the African Writers series, there was a lot of conversation between Francophone and Anglophone, because they were translating. That is going to start again, because now people are doing it intentionally to bring us together. So when you have an Anglophone festival, they do bring Francophone authors and Lusophone authors so that we get to know each other. So there's a movement now where African writers are doing it. But because we are not publishing our books, and we are relying on the West to publish our books. So when it comes to translation, we are still struggling because we're relying on the West to translate our books. However, I was surprised when I read God's Bits Woods again, and it used to be my favorite novel. And I realized that this book was put in different books. I thought I was doing something new. You know, when Chintu came out and people were asking me, oh, how come your book is in different books rather than sections? I said, oh, that works for me. So who influenced you? It just happened. No, actually, I have to correct that. I went back and looked at God's Bits of Wood, and I realized that's where it came from. I didn't come up with it, you know. Yvonne Vera was a major influence. Titi Ndangarembuga, that first opening, I was not sorry when my brother died. You know, as an author, it stays with you. How did she do it? When I read it, what did it do to me? That's what I would like to do to my readers. Of course, Things Fall Apart, which I think I've read over 20 times, but I think it's Hour of God.
Of course.
That influenced me more. I fell in love with Ezeulu.
Yes.
Because he was an intellectual. This is a guy who spent his time, most of his time, in his mind. And when you look at Messi, the intellectual, he's not very different from Ezeulu. Ezeulu didn't have Western education, but he was an intellectual. For me, that is an African intellectual.
Please read Arrow of God.
Oh my God.
I mean, frankly,
that is
it's Achebe's best book.
At his best.
It's not Things Fall Apart. Which
so
fantastic.
that and even then, I didn't realize. It's until I went back to it and I thought, oh God, I thought I was being original, and I could see so obviously these books influenced me. But I read quite a lot from childhood, you know. I read romances. I'm guilty. I read Mills and Boone and Harlequin romance. I know most of you are like, terrible, terrible, Jennifer. But all those books, at least they help you with the plot, you know, because they are good at that. And of course, I read Western fiction. But I've so focused on African literature that I rarely am I aware of what Western literature did to my writing, because I'm more focused on African literature, finding my roots in that literature. Because much as my roots are in oral traditions, other people wrote before me. So I have to go through all this writing that I grew up on to get to the oral tradition.
But I don't think, if I'm I have the mic. I don't think it's something you have to explain. As in, you know, I've been thinking a lot about Chintu as one of the universal novels. And what I know about the books that I enjoy from other cultures is that if the writer writes for their people, and writes the best they can do for their people, it translates.
Oh yeah.
So
I had no idea.
Yeah.
So, and good novel is like a mirror. Sometimes I use the Mona Lisa because that was drawn before the camera, and that picture looks at you. And I imagine the artist drawing it and looking at him. You know, and 500 years later, I walk in front of the Mona Lisa and it's looking at me. You know, that is what a good novel does. I don't have to see everybody in the world to write to them. I just have to see one person, and I write to those people or to that person. And when I step away, that book talks to everybody as if they were the one person I wrote it to.
Do you see why I love that? Questions? Somebody's hand is back there. Every time you listen to Jennifer, it's like you could write it's just quotables. That's what they call them. Everything is a quotable. Yes.
So I have read The First Woman and I've read Chintu, and I loved both. My first question would be, when I read The First Woman, the first thought that came to mind was how you were dealing with feminism in Africa and breaking away from that Western feminism and how women here have been empowered to do things on their own. Now, I feel like that's really wonderful because usually when people talk about feminism, they tend to look at the West, forgetting that our culture is different. Things happen here differently. Women fight differently. We seek empowerment differently. So for me, I think everybody should read The First Woman. But was that what you wanted to do when you first started writing The First Woman? Was that something you wanted to achieve by the time you finished the last sentence? My second question would be, I find that you are not on social media, but do you read all the reviews, the comments, the reviews? Do you get to read them, and how do you deal with the negative? I'm sure somebody somewhere doesn't love your book as much as we all do. So how do you deal with the negative comments? How do you deal with the negative reviews? Thank you.
Sorry, I will answer the second question first because it's very easy. I am not on social media for all sorts of reasons, but also it's because I can't handle adversity. I was on social media before, and I had to come off it because I realized that somebody can pick a fight with you, not necessarily because they are angry with you or whatever, but because they want to be heard. Because if I answer, then people will be interested in what I've got to say, and therefore interested in that person. But also it was because of it was putting a lot of pressure on my mental health, and it wasn't good for me. So I came off it. So for me, reviews, terrible reviews are not a problem. When I read a bad review, and often you realize that the person didn't read the book well, the terrible review that floors me is when somebody picks on something that I did not see, and that's something that is actually wrong, that I can't pull this book back and correct. Now that kills me, okay? That is the review I am frightened of. So, oh, these are the reviews. Oh, she doesn't know how to write. Oh, she does. I'm like, okay, fine. They don't matter because I know my readers also know what is going on in that review. It's until I come across somebody who's read the book very well and identified a major problem that I should have seen. You know, that is the one that I'm frightened of. As for indigenous feminism, it was a major issue for me, obviously. And this is why the book starts in 1975. Because 1975 is when we have that Mexico, the conference, the women's conference in 1975. And at that time, many Ugandans had radios, and people who were middle class had TVs. And it was on radio and it was on TV. And people became aware of feminism as a movement, with icons, with manifestos, people marching. But what I saw for me when I grew up is that feminism then poured into Africa with such strength that it killed all the budding ideas of indigenous feminism that were around. Now, what I want people to know is that wherever women were oppressed, there were feminist ideas. There were feminist strategies. It's just that in Africa, we didn't have it as an organization. We didn't have it as an ideology or a movement. And so wherever women were oppressed, women had feminist ideas, and they had strategies. I don't know about Ghana, but in my culture, women would sit in women's spaces and share strategies. And one of the things that they used to say is, oh, men are such children. Do you know what I do with mine? If he does this, I do that. You know, if he shouts and he wants to feel big, kneel down. What is it going to take away from you? You know? Sometimes they starved their husbands when they were angry with them. So we eat this food that is matoke. So it can be very hot when you just serve it. So she would serve her husband. And as it gets cold, he starts to eat. He says, oh, no. He takes that cold one and gives him a hot one. As that cools down, he gives him a cold one and takes that cold. And they shared that that's how I starve him if he drives me crazy. And so there were all these feminist ideas. And I wanted to say to people that women are not oppressed similarly. Our oppression is culturally specific. The way women were oppressed in the West is not the way they were oppressed in Uganda. So, for example, in the West, women paid dowry. I mean, it just does not make sense to me. Someone marries you, and then you pay him, and then he takes your house, and oh my God. Did you know that women in the West had to fight to start voting? It didn't happen here. So if you take that feminism from the West and impose it on Africa verbatim, it may not work. Now, I'm not saying Western feminism was totally useless. It wasn't. It informed the African world that actually there's this thing that women are fighting for. And of course, African men jumped on it and said, feminism is an African. So what I was trying to do then is to show them that feminism started long before we were with our ancestors, and feminism is already recorded in our oral traditions. This is why I put them there. And this is why I use an old woman whom you can't accuse of being a feminist from the West, teaching a girl of the ABC of traditional feminism. And what I'm trying to do is to say to other cultures, look in your old traditions. You have no idea what your grandmothers left behind. And what we are going to do is to come up with indigenous feminisms around Africa, and we will share strategies, and then that becomes that large block of African feminism, which is going to slot into the global feminism, where you have the French feminism, the American feminism, the black feminism, and all the world feminism. And then we slot in our African feminism. But our African feminisms are multitudinous. You know, there will be a lot. And we invite all nations in Africa to look back in their oral traditions to see what strategies that their ancestors left behind.
Question?
Are the gentlemen here?
Right.
Hi, Nana.
I'm wondering how your stories come to be, whether the myth comes to you first, or whether your characters come to you first, and then how do you really get to know your characters and their constantly speak a bit to that?
Okay, thank you. So how do you know? I often start with the story. So with Chintu, I started with a man. He kills an adoptive son and is cursed by the dad of the son, of the boy. What happens? Okay, and then I spent a lot of years with Chintu, the man. And I could see him in my uncles, in my grandparents, and I needed to see the gestures, I needed to see his face. And of course, I had to draw back onto all the books that I had read. So I always start with the story. But the story comes with a character. That you can't, because this is the story, but who does it happen to? So, and for example, Chirabo, I created Chirabo in 1998. Chirabo, Nsota, grandfather, and grandmother, those 4 characters, I created them in 1998. The book came out in 2020. That is a long time. I would imagine Chirabo in London. What would she do? So I knew her left, right, and center. If I met her at a bus stop, what would she do? That way she didn't surprise me, what she did or what happened in the book. I know what Chirabo was from the moment she was born. And I know what happened to Chirabo after the book closed. Not that I would ever tell you that. J.K. Rowling did it, and it didn't end very well for her. I was like, okay, thank you. But that's how, and because, as I said, most of my stories spend a lot of time in my head, I'm normally with the characters. I am on the bus. Sometimes I'm in the car with my now ex-husband, and he's talking to me, and I am, yeah, of course. And then it's after a while that I realize he's kept quiet, and I'm like, what? I said, yeah, you were not listening. You were into your stories. But that's how much time I spend with my characters. So once I came out and said, yeah, I'm in my books, he said, okay, I understand, you know? But that's how much authors spend time with their characters.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Bonsoir. My name is Abdurrahman Diallo. I'm the UNESCO representative here in Ghana. As you can hear it, I'm a francophone. I was educated in French, in the French ecosystem.
Yeah.
Now coming back, I will say in Ghana, like a sankofa, and learning, and I love your journey, the way you're going back and getting also inspiration, the oral tradition. So I want to ask you more on that. Do you think that the writer today in Africa, in particular, should have a more powerful role, and I will use the militantist role on the Pan-Africanism front also? I want to say that the contemporary writer maybe are a little bit silent, or we don't hear them enough. So do you think that you should play a stronger role on that, and just bringing and echoing and telling more about those histories about Africa? The second one, just wanted to share with you that Accra will be next year the UNESCO World Capital from April 23 to April 24. So what kind of opportunity is it for you as a Ugandan writer to know that Accra will be the capital of book capital of the world? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, about what authors, whether authors should be more activists, and whether they should be writing more historical fiction and talking about the African past, and also talking about Pan-African. It's funny because the novel I'm working on now is on Pan-Africa, but I can't go into that. But authors, different kind of animals. You can't tell them what to write. You know, you can't tell them they should be more activists, because no stories are organic. They happen. You know, I can't write this, I can't write that, but I can write that. So often authors are left to their devices. Whatever comes out is what we deal with. But what I know is that for some reason, African women of my generation are writing a lot of historical fiction. I don't know what's going on, you know? Maybe it's because our mothers and our grandparents, our grandmothers, were kept out of storytelling in terms of history, and were written out of history. And therefore, you find most of the stories that we are telling, they are unearthing our mothers and saying, hang on a minute, this nation was drawn by women as well. This is what women did. So history is being retold from a woman's point of view. I'm reading now a book by Leila Blaila, and it's coming out later. But she's rewriting the Fashoda incident. She's writing the Mahdi rebellion. And at the minute I picked it up, I said, oh my God, that takes me back to my history in O-level. But these are women, this is what women are doing. Now, as Pan-Africanism, with African literature, I've always found that when people write after reading, we always go for things that we haven't seen, things that haven't been done. So give us some time, a new generation will come up and deal with a certain subject and plug those gaps, you know? So this is why I'm saying we can't tell authors what to do. They don't work like that. You say this is what you should do, and that is exactly what they will not do.
Okay. Okay, one more question.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Before I ask my question, I would like to ask the audience, other members of the audience, to help me say thank you for all your words tonight. Yes. Now my question. I know from your presentation that Chintu, the First Woman, is your favorite book.
Is it?
Well, that's how it sounded to me as you've been talking and answering questions. But for me, it's Chintu. And what I would like to know from you is whether the science fiction aspect of Chintu and a whole lot of extent from the First Woman were meant, I mean, did you mean to write science fiction or partial science fiction, or they just came to you?
Okay, thank you very much. Whether Chintu or the First Woman is my favorite, I don't know why that came through like that. I try very much not to show which is my favorite or which isn't. But I think I'm talking more about the First Woman because it's more, I remember it more than than Chintu, which I wrote a long time ago and I've never read. It's because, as you know, the minute you finish editing the book, you're like, I don't want to see the thing again. Because the way editors put you through the ringer. So since 2012, I've never read Chintu. But this one has just been published, so I remember it very well. But when it comes to writing the science fiction element of it, for me, it wasn't science fiction. No, for me, it was religious realism, or what we call spiritual realism. For me, in fact, one time I was invited to a science fiction festival because of what happened. I said, hey, I'll go, and I'll blog it along the way. But actually, for me, this is reality. This is realism. This is what people in Uganda do. It's when it gets to the West, sometimes they call it magical realism, which I'm not so sure, which I don't like. But for me, this is spiritual realism. This is how we prayed. This is how we expressed our spirituality. Now that Christianity has arrived, is erasing it, but not surely, because it's morphing itself into Christianity. So what I found in Uganda when I went back after writing Chintu was that traditional practitioners had also grabbed a few things from Christianity. So now you found them baptizing people. So if somebody comes and say, I was lost. I was lost in Christianity. My name was Lameka, but I'm back to my traditional religion. and then they baptize him. And you're like, seriously, there's no baptism in Africa. But hey, if that's what you're going to do, and then they have books, Bibles by our traditional gods. The book according to Chintu, the book according to so-and-so, the book, and they were saying here it is because they realized that the best way to fight Christianity is to steal a few things from them. So for me, you see why it couldn't be science fiction. It has to be reality, but it's a spiritual reality.
I don't want to argue with you.
Yeah, yeah. But go.
About your own book.
Yeah.
But I disagree.
Could you help me here then? Just if people can bear with us, could you help me? Because this will help me in my writing in future. I'm just ready to learn from you rather than to argue.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there are all those elements from Chintu, which which don't seem, unfortunately, to me, like reality, like realism.
Okay.
You know. Mm-hmm. And then, the first woman, even more so. If someone cuts her breasts up and it morphs into like 9 or 10 other breasts, that is not part of my reality,
yes,
of my world.
Yes.
Maybe Uganda.
Yes. Here's the thing. I don't know about Ghana, but there are a lot of things that end up in our stories that don't make sense.
Okay.
That doesn't mean we don't believe them. You know? Okay. There are certain beliefs in Uganda that you can curse someone and something happens. And scientifically, it doesn't make sense. But everybody tells you it can happen. And for me, that's where creativity starts. That is the wonderful thing that I'm going to carry into my book. Whether it makes sense is not my problem. Because the people I'm writing about, it makes sense to them. And they believe in it. So, for example, I don't know about you, but in Uganda, if old women take off their clothes in anger, all the men will disappear. You know, not the young girls who've got their waistlines in place. That don't do, it doesn't work. They'll stay and stay. But if it's old women who've had children whom they respect, and they've been fighting for something and it doesn't make sense, and they take off their clothes, the men will disappear because it's a curse. But between you and me and Haidu, when you take off your clothes, it's not going to do anything to a man. But it's already in their mind and they believe it. So when I put it in the book, someone will come and say, I don't believe it, it's not the reality. But the people in the book and the people in Uganda, that is their reality. And for me, that's where I make money from.
Shouldn't extend this into a two-person.
You guys should get together.
Yeah, you know. But here, you know, women won't take off their clothes as part of a protest gesture. I think I can claim that for of Ghanaians,
Yeah.
from the south all the way to the north.
But Mommy, we have the phrase Opanohu.
Opanohu.
Opanohu Ogum.
Open who go?
Open who go?
Okay, if you think that means.
Though I've never seen open who means basically she unclosed. Open who go? She unclosed in the marketplace.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, if you think that is unclothing,
Yeah.
a woman unclothing
Yeah.
to men,
Yeah.
then to face men, I better not argue again.
But actually, it happened in Liberia. I think some people are aware. Yeah, it happened in Liberia.
Liberia, it has happened in South Africa,
in Kenya as well.
Yeah.
And it's incredible because that is a woman who has lost her voice, who is not being listened to. All she has is the nakedness of her body, and she's going to wield it as a weapon. And it works. But it works because someone somewhere decided that the woman's body carries a curse on it. And the woman has decided, okay, I'll wield it if you're not listening to me. But actually, we all know that nothing would happen to a man if she looks upon an old woman's body. And that's the nature of things.
Okay.
But thank you,
my
title.
So, my moderation ends here.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
want to thank Frankie and NYU for bringing Jennifer to Ghana. You all need to read her books. This conversation does not even skim, but I hope you've learned something, and I hope it has, Ghanaians like the word gingered your appetite for her book. She is an amazing storyteller, and the thing that is also very precious about her is how much she has developed her craft and how generous she is in sharing it. So thank you, Jennifer. Please clap.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah,
Thank you very, very much. Thank you to everybody on the live stream. Thank you for staying with us this long. On behalf of our Vice Chancellor for Global Programs, the NYU leadership, and all the very dynamic team that work here at NYU Accra, I thank you guys from the bottom of our heart. We are incredibly honored and so grateful and so thankful that the person who has set the highest bars for African scholarship, writing, and just living a life is with us today. Auntie Amatai Dumomi, thank you. God bless you. God bless you for coming. Thank you so much. From our earliest days here doing Labone Dialogues, the Office of the UN Ambassador for the UN Resident Coordinator, Ambassador Charles Abani, has always been supportive to us. He's not here, but we just love the fact that he loves literature and is very, very helpful to all of us here. The United States Embassy as well, Ginny Elliott, Nicole Cholik, thank you guys so much for all that you do for us. For the very first time, we have the Spanish Ambassador with us at Labone Dialogues. Thank you so much, Javier Gutierrez, for coming. We also had Harriet Thompson from the British High Commission. We thank her as well. A few housekeeping things. This would not happen if we don't have great partners. And one of our partners is Project Know Thyself, and they really, really support us by making sure everybody's hydrated. So you'll have bottles of water in your bags to go, and that's from Project Know Thyself. We're very thankful to Avis Rent-A-Car for the transportation for this, to G4S for the security, to Lorenz for our live stream, as well as Sparkling for keeping this place just looking so wonderful. This is, thank you to all the partners. Everyone who knows me knows that I've always said that books saved my life. And the reason that books saved my life is because books give us a pathway. This is a weekend where we have the Pigia Literary Festival from Writers Project Ghana, which are our partners, and a lot of their writers are here, so thank you guys for coming. Round of applause to you guys as well. I want you guys to think about the next time you'll be here for Labone Dialogues. That will be December 1st, and that will be a celebration of theater with our partner, Latif Abubakar and Globe Productions. Please make sure to come. Professor Makumbi, hey, how long has it been since I've been begging you to come here, all the way from England? You're here, and I still can't believe it. I want you to know that NYU Accra is your home now. This is your intellectual home. I know the universities in Europe, in Manchester, and in Berlin want you, but anytime you need to come and write, please come home. We love you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
In addition to the refreshments, we have books. Kina said it best. Writers need to eat. Without them, we're in trouble. So please pick up a book. Thank you everyone for coming. We're very, very grateful from all of us at NYU Accra. Thank you to all of you on the live stream.